Sometimes the greatest beauty lies in the simplest lullaby. Open your ears, open your eyes, and look for the drop of gold. There's nothing fancy about my skin. In my heart is a drop of gold. My greatest treasure lies within. In my heart is a drop of gold. Sometimes the greatest beauty lies in the simplest lullaby. Open your ears, open your eyes, and look for the drop of gold. Sometimes the greatest beauty lies in the simplest lullaby. Open your ears, open your eyes, and look for the drop of gold. Thank you.
Delighted that you're with us. If you love these ladies, as I do, you want to join us on Thursday at 7:30 for our candle lighting service. We're going to do something a little different this year, which will be storytelling and songs by them, not by me, and just a really sweet and lovely time to be together in spiritual community. And of course, we'll end with our candle lighting ceremony. So we invite you to join us and bring your family and friends to be with us. It is always wonderful to celebrate the holidays, isn't it? And I know I always like to remind myself that for many, this is a wonderful and joyous time of year. And for many, it's a painful time of the year. Perhaps you've experienced loss this year or something, and so it may be a first Christmas without a dear loved one. And so I just like to keep our hearts open to that. In fact, sometimes we are led to believe that every moment of our life is meant to be a hallmark moment. And I don't know about you, but I didn't get that life. I got a life that looks like real life with ups and downs and joys and sorrows. But today we get to celebrate Christmas. We get to look at this idea of the divine light that is within us. And for me, there's always this question that seems to come up at some point in time when you start talking to people about this spiritual center that you go to. And it seems as inevitably they're going to ask you a few questions, aren't they? And sometimes, now this happened when I lived in the South more than it happens here, but people would say, now, are you Christian? That's how you say it, Christian. And then you are like, okay, how much of this do I want to, what part of this conversation do I have? So a lot of times I just say yes. How about you? But when people like to engage in a conversation, when people are open to the teaching, I often share that we are a spiritual tradition that is open to all paths, that celebrate all ways to the divine. And so we see in the life of Jesus this wonderful example of our inherent possibility. So we realized, you see, one of the things that I discovered, you see, I grew up as a Southern Baptist kid. So a traditional Bible-studying, church-going kid. And read a lot of these stories, and some of them I kind of struggled with, but you just take it on faith, right? And so it wasn't until after my little sojourn and my prodigal son journey into riotous living, that I came back to look for a new approach to reality. I found myself in a center like this, and they began to help me to understand some things. So I went into Science of Mind classes and discovered the Science of Mind written by Ernest Holmes, which many of us have studied, and a new reality awoke. Because I had been grounded in the Bible as a child and then pretty much set my Bible aside for that 15 years while I was doing riotous living, and not a lot of call for it during that period of time. And when I came back to spirituality, I found a new home. And I found a new way of approaching those stories. And one of the things that I remember reading it was Ernest Holmes was saying, we don't see Jesus as the great exception. We see him as the great example. You see, Jesus is not somehow separate and different from who we are, but rather he was the living embodiment of the presence of the Christ. Now, see, I grew up thinking that was his last name, right? Jesus Christ. That's what they always call him, Mr. Christ, right? But no, I say unto you, not so. So there is a principle, which is the Christ presence, the loving presence of the divine, and there is the person. And so I began to approach this reality from a new way and found great hope and promise in that way of approaching reality. Now, as you'll hear me say over and over and over, I have no need or desire for people to believe what I believe. I figure we are each have brilliant minds. We can figure out our own path. But since I get to talk, I get to tell you what I believe. When you get to talk, you can tell me. But for now, that's not the deal. So, Rocco Errico, many years ago, Rocco Errico is a great Aramaic scholar who helps us understand. You see, many of the writings about Jesus were written in Aramaic in the early time, later translated to Greek, later translated to English, King's English no less. And so we get this very different version of these and thous and all that sort of thing when we read the King James Version of the Bible. But in the Aramaic, it's this very rich and full and deep way of communicating. And so what he talks about, I remember hearing him years ago talking about, he's done a lot of translation. He said, it's like when you approach this from this point of view, it's sort of like, what if there was a duck, and the duck was trying to tell all the chickens how to swim. You're going, I'm a chicken, this is not so easy. You see? I don't got those nice little fat feet. I've got, right? And he said, so it doesn't make sense. What Jesus was saying was, we're all ducks and here's how we swim. Or, more appropriately, we're all divine beings and here's how we live this rich and full and wonderful life. For me, that was a huge transformative time because I began to embrace what I had grown up with a new context and saw Jesus as not the person that I needed to kind of connect with in order to get into heaven, but rather I could discover a place of being, a spiritual dimension, the space that he lived in that was the potential for all of us. Wild, radical thinking. My head, little Southern Baptist brain cells just going, what's going on here, right? But I came to peace with it and I began to understand. So I've been rereading a lovely book by Deepak Chopra, and he talks about the third Jesus. Now I love, we all know Deepak Chopra, wonderful, and it's not one you would think to go to, let's see what Deepak says about Jesus, but he does, as he always does, such a brilliant job of helping us understand. And he says, you see, there's three Jesus. There is the one that is the historical Jesus, this person that lived 2,000 years ago and there is all evidence that Jesus was a historical figure, that he actually lived and had his presence, and there's enough evidence that this is true. And so, his teachings then became the foundation for Christian theology and for study. So the second Jesus is this one, there is the Son of God, where all of this institutional understanding. Religions began to form and be developed, and a dogma was developed, and a priesthood developed, and devout believers began to believe things. And there is a whole church that became massive and strong and wonderful and did good works in the world based on this man, with wonderful theological discussions. And if you ever decide, for some crazy reason, you want to go into seminary and study some of these things, you realize there is a wide berth of understanding about the teachings of Jesus. So, and that happened from the early days right up till now. There's different ways of approaching that. Now, I often talk about this idea that we have developed theology and mythology around Jesus. And I know, as I said, I always have my grandma and grandpa Bacher on one shoulder going, don't be teaching this evil stuff, you know? And then I have Ernest Holmes sitting on the other going, it's cool. I've done it for years. It's all right? Because it's never to diminish anyone's understanding, but it is to sort of appreciate the larger story. And so there is mythology has been with humanity for as long as we have existed. And we have always tried to answer the questions, who are we? Where did we come from? What is the purpose of our life? All those sorts of things. And so throughout the ages, there's always been mythologies that people helps them connect to the larger life. So it's not unreasonable that we would connect the person of Jesus, the historical figure, with a mythology. And it's rich and it's deep and it's powerful. You see, the thing that I say over and over is things don't have to be literally true in order for them to carry truth. They don't have to be factually accurate in order for truth to be revealed. You see, this was one of the great breakthroughs for me because I grew up reading a Bible told it was literally true. But if you read it as literal truth, it gets very confusing. All kinds of weird stuff happens. God creates the whole universe and then starts over again about the next chapter. And you're like, what? Didn't we just do that? Right? Right? And things happen and people get swallowed by whales and they spend 3 days and then they're like, I'm fine. I'm cool. It's all good. Right? Things happen. You're like, okay, that's odd. So, we're just going to go all out with the blasphemy today. Just want to give you a little warning. Now, I don't make it wrong, but when you try and understand it from a literal point of view, it gets confusing. Just as if you try and read Huckleberry Finn from a literal point of view, that's one way you could read it. You could read it as a historical document, but there's a metaphor. So when we embrace the mystery, the mythology, then it becomes very rich and full and beautiful. And we begin to understand how Christmas has developed not only as a study of an understanding of one person's life and how light was brought to the world, but how we can each embrace that light. You see, one of the brilliant things about Christianity has been its adaptability. So early on, there was the celebration of a man who was born on December 25th, who was born of a virgin, and he was the sun god, Mithra. Right? Google it. I'm telling you. I don't just make this stuff up. I'm telling you. Right? Roman god. Was the sun god that appeared at the winter solstice as light was coming into the world again. So as Christianity developed as an organized religion, it just sort of worked for them. You see, back in the day, everybody worth anything was born of a virgin. I mean, if you had anything to say, right? Because that's how mythology works. The Buddha, it is told. You see, so for me, it's helpful to break out some of that stuff because otherwise it's too confusing to me. But when I begin to understand, maybe there's another story. So what Deepak Chopra says is, and finally there is the third Jesus, the cosmic Christ, the spiritual guide whose teaching embraces all humanity, not just the church built in his name. He speaks to the individual who wants to find God as a personal experience, to attain what some might call grace, or God consciousness, or enlightenment. You see, we have richly inherited wisdom through the ages of enlightened souls, of people who've been able to have a more expanded understanding of the world in which we live. And we call them enlightened. They have light within them, and they share and shine their light. So I look to the Buddha for understanding about peace and compassion. I look to Jesus to understand about forgiveness and love and letting go. I look to all of these great teachers, and it is not necessary in my mind that we have to love one and not another. For me, this is the great gift that this teaching gave me, is it gave me a foundation to understand the nature of reality and how it unfolds, and an appreciation for the many paths for our human understanding of the divine. So we look to this idea that there is a cosmic presence that we are each a part of. There is a divine intelligence that is our very inheritance, that a person was born and awakened to that. And so I love having begun to, once I got beyond the mindset that this is how it is and that's what, then it was like, wow, I can study all kinds of things. And then I began to realize that as I learned more about Christmas, that it's this whole, all the things that we do as the nature of our everyday Christmas experience are really, it's really rich with all kinds of pagan rituals. All kinds of stuff that happen where we bring greenery into our house. And we put lights on it. And we do all of these things that coincide with traditions and rituals that had been in place for years and years and years and years. And we just take it as normal. So I'm always tempted, because I am who I am, I'm always tempted to set up my little nativity scene and put a little Christmas tree in the corner, or just put a little something, extra, just say, it's Christmas, why not? But you see, we've embraced and embellished the story. No big deal. But when we look at the mythological story, the story of the birth of innocence, that the Christ child is born in the most simple of circumstances. There's something very powerful about that imagery, and that person then goes on to embrace reality. I'm talking reality with a large R now, that it embraces possibility and goes on to teach us the truth of who we are. You see, when that happens for the enlightened soul, they speak in the I am. They speak in the first person. And so we have record of Buddha saying I am statements. We have record well before Jesus in our Old Testament of all of the prophets spoke in the I am. You see, when we say I am the light, I am the truth, I am the way, we are each that if we will awaken to our inherent possibility. We are spiritual beings. This is the truth of who we are. But we don't always recognize that. Sometimes we forget. Sometimes we think our circumstances determine who we are. You see, this is part of the beauty of the Christmas story, that it is humble circumstances that greatness occurred. I would love the imagery of babies, because for me personally, nothing says I know God like holding a baby. Just that original innocence. When Jesus spoke to his followers, he would say to them that if you want to enter into this spiritual dimension, he called it the kingdom of heaven, you must become like a little child. In other words, you must have the innocence of someone unconditioned. In Buddhism, they talk about it as the beginner's mind, seeing things with new eyes, hearing it new ears. You see, we have to be able to move beyond this dimension to the higher dimension. So in that context, what I see, what Chopra says and what I agree with is Jesus was teaching us the essentials of a spiritual life. He was saying, here's how you live a spiritual life. And I promise you, if you read the entire text, you will never hear Jesus say, worship me. He did say, follow me. Follow this way of being. So here's what he was teaching us. He's teaching us meditation, to go within to contact the silent mind. He taught us contemplation, reflection on the truth. These stories that he teaches are rich and deep. They seem very simple at one level. But when you study them and you embrace them and you contemplate them, there's deep, powerful meaning behind them. He spoke of it, taught us about revelation, that we can all receive spiritual insight. We can all receive new insight and awareness as we connect with this divine mind. He taught us about prayer, about asking for a higher guidance. He taught us about grace, about taking the divine into our heart and living in that state of being. He spoke to us and taught us about faith, about believing in this higher reality, even when conditions would point to its opposite. You see, we get to believe in something. Most of the world believes that their lives are determined by the things that exist, the people that exist. They believe that the outer determines the inner. You, my friends, are part of a select group of people, it's growing, that knows that your outer is a reflection of your inner. And if you want more good in the outer, then something must be revealed within us. And that is where our work comes. That's where the power comes. So we're all going to believe in something. I choose to believe in God. I tried to do it on my own for a long time, and it did not work that well. When I realized that God was not something separate from me, but was working through me as a divine presence and a divine principle, then I began to take responsibility for my own participation. You see, I grew up believing that there was a God out there that would reward or punish me. What? Because I was either naughty or I was nice. I mean, all this stuff comes from somewhere, right? Right? I believed that. Now I no longer believe that. I believe that we, as Ernest Holmes says, that this power can only work for us as it can work through us. The nature of creation can only work according to our own nature and our own belief. And so as we become more expansive, as we become more enlightened, as we become more aware, we become the vessel through which greater good can reveal itself in the world. He taught us about salvation. He taught us that we have a place in a higher reality. That we have a place. In my Father's house, there are many dimensions. There are many ways of expressing this. And finally, he taught us about unity, about how to become one with the divine. All of that is there. And so, as I said, I love what Albert Schweitzer said to us. He said, I don't want the religion about Jesus. I want the religion of Jesus. You see, it's very different, isn't it? When I realize that I'm not going to the duck trying to figure out how to be a better chicken, but rather realizing that I have inherent capacity as I become awake to it, and as I practice, and as I learn to love more fully and forgive more freely and to extend compassion to everyone, then something is awakened with me, and my light shines brightly in the world. The Master said to us, don't hide your light. Let it shine brightly. It's an interesting thing that so much of our thinking is about hiding who we are. That somehow culturally we've been conditioned to not say magnificent things about ourselves. Isn't that odd? Yeah. It is odd to me. And yet we're all pretty schooled in it. So all of these teachings are embraced in this. So I can celebrate all of it. You see, I was sharing at the earlier service that I got to go to this wonderful choir, this Utah Valley Millennial Choir, held at the big hall right across from the Mormon church, Bravenal, thank you. And it was amazing. I mean, it was amazing. They probably have 400 or 500 people in this whole choir. They got little kids that are about this big, and they did their little song, and it was great. That all different ages and this whole thing. They come in, they go out. And it was like, whew, just the choreography of it with a full orchestra is like, whew. But what I began to realize is that there was a lot of people that don't believe what I believe. And it's okay. It's still beautiful. They believe in a more traditional understanding of this. It's okay. I loved all of it. I love all of it. I don't need anyone to believe what I believe. I don't like it when they want me to believe what they believe. But, right? But I'm okay, I'm not going to fight about it. I'm just going to love people. You see, this is the great gift that Science of Mind gave me. It gave me a foundation to understand the nature of reality, the nature of the creative process, to have a concept of how creation takes place through us, and a wonderful place to stand and then appreciate what does Islam teach? What do the Hindus teach? What do the Taoists teach? Because what you find when you look at it from that perspective is there's way more in common than there is different. We allow ourselves to get stuck on the differences. It must be part of our human condition that we recognize our differences instead of our inherent sameness. For me, so I celebrate. Now, I grew up as a Christian. It's my basis, and we have a pretty heavy-duty thing. We don't do a lot of Buddhist ceremony here. If I'd grown up as Buddhist, we probably would, right? But it doesn't matter because truth is truth. So as we're in this time of celebration, let us just rejoice in it. Let us love it. Let us seek to understand, though, the deeper meanings. Ernest Holmes, in all of his many words, and he had many, he had more than I did, and that's saying something. If you've read Ernest, he's quite complex and takes a while to get to a point and all that sort of thing. He uses a lot of capitalized letters and, all kinds of things. But he said was powerful thing that I always come back to, and he says, in conclusion, what the world needs is spiritual conviction followed by spiritual experience. He said, I would rather see a student of this science prove its principle than to have him or her repeat all the words of wisdom that have ever been uttered. You see, it's easy to get into all of the words that have ever been uttered and be very spiritually aware and be very whatever. But he's saying, what I want is spiritual conviction followed by experience. He goes on to say, and I know this was actually directed at me, and I'm a little offended by it, but I'm getting over it. Because he says to me, it is far easier to teach the truth than it is to practice it. Right? Haven't you noticed that? It's easier to talk about the way the universe works than to actually implement that understanding into our everyday, daily living. Sometimes it's easier to talk about forgiveness than it is to actually forgive someone. Sometimes it's easier to talk about peace on earth than it is to be at peace. So Holmes is teaching us what Jesus was teaching us, which the Buddha was teaching us, which Krishna was teaching us, was that we are a part of a divine cosmos. We are one with the infinite. And that as we open our hearts and our minds and our very being to this higher order of things, then all things shall be added unto that. So in all of our getting, let us get understanding. See, I love how Baptist I get to be this time of year. Around the first of the year, I'll have to go back to normal signs of mine. Every once in a while, throw a little Jesus in there. But today, let us celebrate and rejoice in it. But there is a wonderful proverb that I want to close with today. Because gaining wisdom is the ultimate goal, and then living from that wisdom. And in Proverbs it says to us, in 3:13, it says, "Joyful is the person who finds wisdom, the one who gains understanding. For wisdom is more profitable than silver, and her wages are better than gold. Wisdom is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her. She offers you long life in her right hand and riches and honor in her left. She will guide you down delightful paths. All her ways are satisfying. Wisdom is the tree of life to those who embrace her. Happy are those who hold her tightly." You see, in the Bible, wisdom is often translated as Sophia. It is definitely a feminine quality. And so there is a knowledge and wisdom. There is creation and wisdom coming together to produce its offspring, the Christ child, the Christed way of being in the world. So in this season of love and joy and harmony, as we celebrate the birth of the Christ, as we celebrate the birth of Jesus, let us also celebrate the birth of the Christ that lives within each one of us. Let us be willing to allow our light to shine brightly. Let us be willing to proclaim and announce our inherent wholeness. You can come up. I'm going to get to pray. They're like, "Are you going to pray or are you just going to keep talking?" No, I am going to pray. I'm going to pray right now. Thank you. All right, I get it. Get the hook. I'll stop now. I love these people. And another thing. All right, you want to pray? Let's pray. So I invite you to join me as we move into that conscious recognition of the one life ever present and always available, of this infinite presence, and knowing that whatever name we give it, it is more than that. So I like to refer to it as the divine, as life itself, as the essence. For I know that this one expresses in and through and as all of creation. Therefore I know that it is this divine intelligence that expresses through me and through each of us gathered here. As we join together in this sacred season of light, we recognize the light that lives within each one of us. We celebrate our inherent beauty, our inherent being. And we call forth that light to be a presence of peace in the world. As we accept this divine inheritance, our oneness with this divine presence, we reaffirm that truth that each one of us is divine in origin. So we choose to have eyes that see and ears to hear. We experience that greater reality. We move through the world confidently because we know from whence we came. We call forth the presence of love in every action and in every activity, fully forgiving, freely and joyously extending compassion to our brothers and sisters around the world. We're holding the high truth. We are knowing that we are one with this divine intelligence and that by our very nature we are abundant beings. For all creation is taking place through us and as us. So we choose a more powerful experience of this life. How blessed we are in this moment to recognize the presence of wholeness, to know that that wholeness reveals itself as health, as well-being, as vitality, that we move into right relationship with the divine, And all things are made new. All things are made possible. So we give thanks in this moment for the many blessings, those seen and those yet to be realized. We extend a blessing. We bless this spiritual community, this divine idea unfolding in ways of peace, of joy, of harmony, abundantly and joyously. We extend a blessing to our brothers and sisters around the planet. You see, we know that there is a brotherhood and sisterhood of all humanity. And so we're knowing a world that works for everyone. We're holding the high vision for a planet at peace, knowing we're only a thought away from peace itself. We call forth love on every continent, in every place in the world. Truly, we're accepting peace on earth and goodwill towards all. And so we bless all priests, rabbis, ministers, and teachers of every faith. For we know there are many pathways to the vine, and therefore we celebrate them. We call them good. So for all of these blessings and so many more, I'm simply giving thanks and speaking this word of truth and releasing it to a law of mind that brings forth the highest good for all concerned. So with profound joy and gratitude, I simply give thanks, knowing that it is so, as together we say, and so it is.